Welcome to Biohacking Tips and Tricks, your go-to YouTube channel for all things biohacking and wellness. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on the latest biohacking secrets and tips for optimizing your health. In today's video, we're diving deep into the science behind insulin resistance, a condition that not only plays a major role in diabetes, but also has far-reaching effects on various other diseases and overall metabolic health. Insulin resistance is a key factor in many chronic diseases. But what exactly is it? How does it develop? And why is it so important? In simple terms, insulin resistance occurs when the cells in your muscles, fat, and liver don't respond well to insulin, a hormone that helps your body manage glucose, sugar. This means that even though insulin levels may be high, the body's cells aren't responding as they should. Over time, this dysfunction forces your pancreas to produce more insulin to try and bring blood sugar levels down. But eventually, the pancreas can't keep up, leading to elevated blood sugar levels, which can result in type 2 diabetes. However, insulin resistance goes beyond diabetes. It's connected to a range of conditions, including cardiovascular disease, polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD, and even Alzheimer's disease. Let's start by discussing why insulin levels can be high, even when insulin function is low. The answer lies in the receptors that bind insulin on the cells. Over time, these receptors become down-regulated, meaning there are fewer of them, and the signaling pathways beyond the receptor become dysfunctional. This is the crux of insulin resistance. Essentially, your body is producing insulin, but the cells aren't listening to it, and the body becomes resistant to its effects. This downregulation occurs in different tissues for different reasons, and that's why insulin resistance leads to different diseases depending on which part of the body is affected. For example, insulin resistance at the liver leads to type 2 diabetes. When it occurs at the ovary, it contributes to polycystic ovarian syndrome. In the heart, it is linked to cardiovascular disease, and in the brain, research suggests insulin resistance could be a factor in the development of Alzheimer's disease. These different regions of the body experience insulin resistance in distinct ways, and that's why insulin resistance doesn't show up as a single disease, but manifests through various conditions. One of the main areas where insulin resistance starts is in fat tissue, particularly subcutaneous fat, the fat stored under your skin. Subcutaneous fat can cause insulin resistance, but typically only at very high levels. This explains why some people can be obese yet metabolically healthy. They're able to store excess fat in subcutaneous tissues without causing insulin resistance. However, once that storage capacity is exceeded, the membranes in fat cells begin to rupture, and this is where insulin resistance starts to develop. Another pathway to insulin resistance that is less commonly discussed is stress. Cortisol, the stress hormone, can cause insulin resistance independent of food or energy intake. For instance, people with clinical depression, who may be losing weight and not eating much, can still develop insulin resistance due to chronic stress. This is because cortisol, along with alterations in the sympathetic nervous system, can drive insulin resistance. This is similar to what happens in patients with Cushing syndrome, where elevated cortisol levels lead to metabolic dysfunction. Now, let's talk about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD, a condition that is becoming alarmingly common. It affects 45% of Americans and 25% of the global population. NAFLD leads to the buildup of fat in the liver, and when the liver is overloaded with fat, it doesn't respond well to insulin. This is significant because the liver is the primary organ that insulin acts on to regulate blood sugar. When liver cells become fatty and dysfunctional, the pancreas has to produce even more insulin to compensate, which exacerbates insulin resistance. What's fascinating is that NAFLD isn't exclusive to obese individuals. You can be thin and still have fatty liver disease, which means you can be thin and insulin resistant, just as you can be obese and insulin resistant. For years, We've been taught that calories are the key to managing weight and preventing diseases like diabetes. This belief is rooted in the idea that it's all about calories in, calories out, that if you consume more calories than you burn, you'll gain weight, and if you burn more than you consume, you'll lose weight. This has led to a focus on controlling gluttony and sloth, overeating and inactivity as the main drivers of metabolic diseases. But this simplistic view ignores the complexity of how different macronutrients, fats, proteins, and carbohydrates affect the body differently. The food industry has long promoted the idea that it's your fault if you're overweight, because it's supposedly all about calories. But research shows that this focus on calories is misleading. For example, certain countries have high rates of diabetes without widespread obesity, while other countries are experiencing high obesity rates, but lower rates of diabetes. This shows that obesity and diabetes do not always go hand in hand. Consider the global trends. Obesity is growing at a rate of 2.78% per year, while diabetes is increasing at 4.07% per year. If diabetes were simply caused by obesity, these rates should increase in tandem, but they don't. In the US, the rate of diabetes is rising just as fast in the normal weight population as it is in the obese population. So the idea that obesity alone causes diabetes doesn't fully explain what's going on. To further complicate the story, there are rare conditions that illustrate why calories aren't the whole picture. Take Laron dwarfism, for example. This genetic condition affects growth hormone signaling, leading to obesity, but without the typical metabolic consequences like diabetes or cancer. In a group of Laron dwarfs in Ecuador, these individuals are short and obese, yet they have 0 diabetes and 0 cancer. Meanwhile, their normal height relatives who don't have the growth hormone defect are thin but suffer from diabetes and cancer. This example clearly shows that being obese doesn't automatically make you sick. Another condition, lipodystrophy, involves the inability to store fat properly in fat cells. These individuals can't store fat in their fat tissue, so the excess fat gets stored in their muscles and liver, leading to severe insulin resistance and diabetes, even though they aren't technically fat. Again, this shows that it's not simply about how much fat you have, but where the fat is stored and how it affects your body's ability to use insulin. This leads us to conclude that calories are not the sole cause of insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. While fat stored in the wrong places, like visceral fat or liver fat, can definitely cause insulin resistance, the notion that it's purely about calories in, calories out is outdated. The quality of the food we eat and the biological responses it triggers play a much more critical role in how our bodies develop insulin resistance and other metabolic diseases. So, insulin resistance is a much more complex issue than just counting calories or tracking fat. It involves stress, hormones, where fat is stored, and how different macronutrients affect our bodies. Understanding these factors is essential for preventing and managing diseases like type 2 diabetes and other chronic conditions tied to metabolic dysfunction. If you're interested in learning more about how to manage insulin resistance and optimize your metabolic health, be sure to subscribe to Biohacking Tips and Tricks for more in-depth videos and insights.